Shweta, one thing about you that everyone seems to know is that you read a lot. Words mean a lot to you. And so, your first book, you're someone who does many things. You've been a columnist, you've just launched a fashion label. Your first book, how momentous is this occasion for you?
Is it? Extremely, extremely momentous. I can hardly believe it.
There are pros and cons of having your parents on stage with you. You've dedicated Paradise Towers to your grandfathers.
Yes.
To the poet Harivansh Rai Bachchan and to the journalist Tarun Kumar Bhaduri.
That's right.
Could you tell us a little more about how these illustrious writers shaped you as a reader and as a writer?
So Raja, while growing up, we were always surrounded by literature. We were encouraged to read, not just by my grandfather, but also my grandmother. And there was always a huge influence of storytelling. Every night before we went to bed, my grandparents lived with us, and my brother and me would go to our dadi's room, and we would spend an hour there, and she would tell us stories, orally, of course. And we would be fascinated and ask for more, and she would continue to tell us stories till it was time to get to bed. And we grew up with a very strong influence of that. So it was a lot about storytelling. My grandfather on every birthday wrote us a poem to each of his 6 grandchildren on their separate birthdays as a gift. And my Nana was very passionate and opinionated, about issues that were close to his heart. He was a very liberated man, and he always encouraged women to, go out there and do something and make something of their lives, as he did with his 3 daughters. So I think it's a mix of both of these things. Nana wrote mainly in Bengali, and I don't read it or write it, unfortunately, so I haven't been able to read his stuff. But they were always furiously scribbling away, both of them, whenever I visited them. My Dadaji every day, and Nana whenever we went over to meet him in Bhopal. So I think that left a huge impact in my mind. And that's why they are the people who I would dedicate my books to.
And where did the storytelling bug bite you? Do you remember the first thing you wrote?
The first things I actually remember writing were get well soon cards to my father when he was recuperating after his accident on the sets of Coolie. We weren't allowed to visit him, but every Friday we would sit down and make cards. So we would write him little reassuring cards, telling him that don't worry, we're fine, we're studying hard, and get well soon and come home soon. So that's the first thing I remember writing.
And the idea of storytelling, just getting into the fact that, did you enjoy writing from that point on?
I've always enjoyed writing, but for myself, it's very daunting writing for others. You always like what you write. You can't say that about other people. And I was always the eldest of the bunch, and I was always telling stories to all my younger cousins and my brother. So I think maybe that's where it came from.
And who were your favorite writers growing up? Who were the influences on Paradise Towers, so to speak?
Well, Jane Austen, because her characters were so vivid and so funny and just so precise. Even though we don't live in that age, she's fleshed them out so well that, you know these people, you've seen these people, their little quirks, their foibles, their, little tics, as you would say. So she would be one of my hugest influences. And Dickens, he's done the same with his.
Right. Writers that have stayed timeless, yes. Really.
Yes.
It's also exciting that you've made your debut with not just a novel, but a book of humor, which is rarer. We don't see that many fresh, funny voices. I think Udayan would back me up on that. And, this is exciting. Why did you choose humor?
Actually, it wasn't intentional. But if you look around you, when you live in a city like Bombay, there's so many funny things going on, and just so quaint and particular to Indians. And they have a wonderful way of doing the ordinary things, but just infusing them with a lot of quirks, which I find really entertaining. And I didn't intend to make it funny. It was just the way they were written. And it just happened to be funny.
You know, everyone's gone on about how observant you are. And I agree, when I read the book, that was the first thing. There's so many, you know, acute observations of people. But I'm mystified about how you can get to observe these people. Because the residents of this Paradise Towers, which is like this, you know, ambitiously named perfect building, which is imperfect residence, it's a world very different from the world you occupy. And you don't have very much anonymity to go on the street and observe people. So how do you come up with these characters?
As everyone has said repeatedly, I've always been a very shy child, and growing up I've been very shy too, so it always meant I was in the background, and there was always so much going on around the members of my family, different people who would come and visit, whether it was Diwali or Holi or birthdays, and it gave me a chance to observe people and you know, the way they behave, their body language, but you know, peculiar traits they would have. And these things always stayed in my mind, and they found their way onto paper in Paradise Towers.
You know, Truman Capote once said that all literature is gossip. And you seem to have taken that a lot to heart. A lot of this is about what people are whispering about other people and the idea of, you know, changing degrees of perception. So, is that the kind of book you like reading as well? Is this more juicier narrative? Is that your kind of style?
It's not only the kind of book I like reading, but again, huge influences from when you read anything by Jane Austen. She always has, you know, there's some kind of internal dialogue going on, specifically between the women. And it's funny and it's engaging, and I think it draws you into the book, and it sort of familiarizes you with the characters, because they're doing human things. They're not supernatural. They're doing human things that you relate to and you do. So I think that's why, you know, it's there.
You know, this is a book that is a little more complicated than it seems. You know, when you pick it up, it starts out, it's very fresh and frothy. I would call it like, this is a mimosa with too much champagne. You know, it's very bubbly, but it packs more of a kick than you might expect. It, you know, delves into depth, and it delves into human frailty, and there is insecurity in the characters. So I'm curious to know, what was your genesis for this? What was your starting germ that made you think, I will write a book about this building and these people?
People have always fascinated me. They're interesting to watch, and specifically people in my country, because they come from such different places and mindsets and ideologies and customs, but when you put them all together, they somehow get along, and they manage to pull along. And that's always fascinated me. It's just such a country teeming with, you know, people with different characters and characteristics, also a lot of stereotypes. But sometimes they rise above them, and but more than often they succumb to them.
Sure.
And that in itself is so entertaining for me.
Yeah, it's fascinating. But was there one character that came first, or one little bit of the storyline that came first, and you thought, okay, I can build something around this? Not to give too much away to, you know, people who haven't read the book.
The building came first.
Okay.
The building came first.
Right.
And then I had to people it. And I drew from people I've met, some family members, mainly my Bengali side of the family. and that's how it came about.
Right. And there's one section I picked out because it reads incredibly cinematically. You know, there are bits of the book that read very much like a movie. You know, one bit that I really liked is about a policeman who's wiping his bald head using the same handkerchief with which he had previously handled evidence. So someone notices him doing this, and he immediately ties it around his neck like a scarf. So this is it's a visually comic moment. It's ripe for the movies, you know. So coming from a film family, do you often find yourself like thinking cinematically, visually?
Inadvertently, yes. I think a lot of what we write is influenced by art, and that is cinema, that's pictures, what you see on television, and today what you find on Instagram and all of that. So yes, definitely.